Before we begin, a quick note. The opinions and analysis shared on Truth Seekers are our own interpretations of published research and should not be used as medical, financial, or professional advice. Always consult qualified professionals for decisions affecting your health or well-being.
And with that out of the way, welcome to Truth Seekers. I'm Bill Morrison.
And I'm Alex Barrett. Today is March 12th, 2026, and we're talking about Your Morning Coffee is Fine, how 92 people sparked a global panic.
Let's get to the truth.
So I woke up last week, made my coffee, opened my phone, and immediately read that my coffee was trying to kill me. Specifically, that anything over 400 milligrams of caffeine a day, that's roughly 4 cups, could increase my risk of cardiovascular disease. Brilliant start to the morning.
And that headline was everywhere. I had 3 people text it to me in the same day. My mom called.
Your mum called?
My mom called to tell me to cut back on espresso. So, yes, this one made the rounds.
Actually, hang on. 400 milligrams, 4 cups. Does anyone actually know what that means in practice? Because I had what I think was a large flat white this morning, and I genuinely don't know if that counts as 1 cup or 2.
That's a fair question. It depends entirely on the shot. A standard espresso is about 63 milligrams. A drip coffee, maybe 90 to 100. So 4 cups of drip coffee gets you there. But if you're having double shots in everything, you could hit 400 in 2 drinks.
So 4 cups is completely meaningless as a unit of measurement.
It's almost useless without knowing how it was brewed. And this actually matters for how the study categorized people, which we'll get to.
Okay, fine, we'll get to it. But your mum, she rang you specifically.
She did. She's seen me drink a lot of coffee. She was concerned.
That's actually quite sweet.
It's very sweet. It's also based on a study we are about to take apart completely.
Right, yes, let's do that. So, I want to be upfront about why this caught my attention, because when I was working in newsrooms, I watched this exact pattern play out constantly. A study drops, someone writes a terrifying headline, it gets shared 500,000 times, and then quietly, very quietly, the nuance never catches up. And I got tired of being part of that machinery.
So let's catch it up. The headline says New study finds chronic high caffeine consumption may heighten risk for cardiovascular disease, which sounds authoritative. It sounds like science did something definitive. But let's look at what the science actually did.
Right. So this comes from a presentation at the ACC Asia 2024 conference. That's the American College of Cardiology, held in Delhi in August 2024. And already, before we get to a single number, that word presentation is doing a lot of work.
That's the thing that jumped out at me immediately. A conference presentation is not a published, peer reviewed study. It's researchers standing up in a room saying, here's something we've been working on. It hasn't gone through the full process where other scientists independently scrutinize the methodology, the analysis, the conclusions.
Okay, and I want to push on this slightly, does the peer review distinction actually matter here? Because I've seen peer reviewed studies that are also terrible. A bad study is a bad study, published or not.
I'd push back on that a little. I mean, yes, peer review doesn't catch everything, and there are genuinely bad published studies, but the process exists for a reason. It's a filter. It forces researchers to answer questions they might not have thought to answer. When something skips that step entirely and lands in a press release, there's no one in the middle asking, wait, did you control for this? You lose the quality check.
That's fair. I suppose what I'm saying is it's not sufficient on its own. Like, this wasn't peer reviewed doesn't automatically mean it's wrong. It just means we have less reason to trust it.
Right, exactly. It's one layer of many. And with this particular study, it ends up being the first of several problems, not the only one.
Okay, go on then. What did they actually study?
So the researchers took 92 participants, healthy adults ages 18 to 45, normal blood pressure, and they gave them a step test,
A step test.
a single 3-minute step test. Participants stepped up and down on a platform.
That's the whole thing?
That's the cardiovascular stress event, yes. And then they measured heart rate and blood pressure at baseline, 1 minute after the test and 5 minutes after the test.
Right, and they compared recovery between participants who reported drinking more than 400 milligrams of caffeine daily versus those who didn't. Okay,
And what they found was that the high caffeine group showed slightly elevated heart rate and blood pressure after the step test, and slightly slower recovery at that 5 minute mark.
hmm.
That's a real finding. There's a genuine, measurable difference there. The problem is what they concluded from it.
Which is, and stop me if I'm wrong, that this means those people are at elevated risk of cardiovascular disease.
That's the leap.
Okay, no, I'm sorry. I need to sit with this for a second. They measured how quickly someone's heart rate came back down after stepping on a box for 3 minutes. And from that, they concluded cardiovascular disease risk.
That's the leap, yes.
That gap is enormous because your heart rate goes up. I mean, my heart rate goes up if someone startles me in the kitchen. That's not a vascular condition, that's a Tuesday.
The analogy I kept thinking of is it's like saying because your face went red during a work presentation, you have a chronic vascular condition. The body responds acutely to things. That's what bodies do. And then they recover. Treating a short term stress response as evidence of long term disease risk, that requires a lot more than a 3-minute step test to support.
And there's another layer here, isn't there? Because
The sample.
the sample. Tell them about the sample.
Of those 92 participants, only about 18, that's 19.6%, were actually in the high caffeine group, the group the headline is warning you about.
So 18 people.
18 people doing a step test.
And I'm actually, wait, did I read that right? I thought it was closer to 20%. I had it in my notes as roughly a fifth, 19.6%. So you're right, it rounds to about a fifth. 18 people. 18 people. And nobody followed them up to see if they actually developed cardiovascular disease.
Not even close. This is cross sectional. One snapshot in time, no follow up, no tracking of outcomes. Not a single participant in this study had a heart attack or a stroke or was diagnosed with hypertension. What they had was a slightly elevated heart rate 5 minutes after stepping on a box.
So no one in this study developed any cardiovascular disease, and yet,
And yet,
brilliant. What else didn't they control for?
fitness level, exercise habits, body weight, stress, sleep quality, genetics, and that last one matters quite a bit because there's a specific gene variant that determines how fast you metabolize caffeine, and it completely changes how your cardiovascular system responds. Two people drinking the same amount of coffee can have wildly different physiological responses based purely on that gene. None of that was accounted for.
And this is what used to drive me mad at the news outlet. The study's own lead author scoped it quite clearly. I've got the quote. They said, What they were looking at was specifically the recovery of heart rate and blood pressure. That's the actual scope. That's what was measured. But somehow, recovery of heart rate after a step test became drinking coffee could give you cardiovascular disease.
The press release from the ACC even used could put otherwise healthy individuals at risk. Could, might. And those words completely disappeared by the time it hit social media.
We used to call this hedge laundering in the newsroom. You take a cautious, qualified claim, and by the third paragraph, you've stripped out all the caveats and you've got a clean, scary headline. And actually, this is exactly what we were talking about with that cold plunge episode, isn't it? The ice bath one.
Yes, the anti aging thing. Same mechanism. The paper said might and potentially about 6 times. And by the time it was being shared, it was cold plunges slow aging. The qualifiers exist for a reason, and they just evaporate.
They always evaporate. Okay, so now the other side of this. Because there is a lot of evidence on coffee and cardiovascular health that isn't 18 people on a step test.
This is the part I find genuinely exciting from a methodology standpoint, because we don't just have some data here, we have extraordinary data. In 2013, a meta analysis was published in Circulation, one of the top peer reviewed cardiology journals in the world. And the researchers pooled data from, I want to say, over 30 studies. Actually, let me back up. It was 36 prospective cohort studies. 36.
And prospective cohort means
These are studies that follow real people over years, sometimes decades, and track actual disease outcomes. Not did your heart rate spike after a step test? Did you develop heart disease? Did you have a stroke? These are the studies that answer the question the conference presentation claims to be answering.
how many people total across all of those?
1.28 million participants, with over 36,000 cardiovascular disease cases tracked.
1.28 million versus 18 people on a step test.
Versus 18 people on a step test. And what that analysis found was not that coffee increases cardiovascular risk, it found the opposite. 3 to 5 cups a day was actually associated with the greatest protection against cardiovascular disease.
That's actually quite good. I don't mean that dismissively. That's a genuinely strong finding, isn't it? Not just neutral, actively protective.
In that range, yes. And for very heavy coffee drinkers, more than 5 cups a day, there was still no increased risk. The protection just attenuated a bit. And a 2023 systematic review in pharmaceutical medicine, 140,000 patients, came to a similar conclusion about 4 cups a day.
Okay, so here's where I want to push back a bit though, because I've been sitting with something as you're describing this.
Go on.
Those large prospective studies, they're measuring actual cardiovascular disease outcomes over time, which is brilliant and they're clearly more robust. But they're not measuring the same thing this conference study was measuring, are they? They're not measuring acute cardiovascular response to stress. So when you say the big studies contradict this, I'm not sure they fully do. They're answering a different question.
Hmm.
Like the step test study was asking, does caffeine change how your heart responds to exertion? And the meta analysis was asking, do coffee drinkers develop more heart disease? Those aren't the same question.
That's actually a fair point. And I want to be honest, I led with the million-person data because it's so compelling. And I think I let it do more argumentative work than it strictly can. You're right that the two studies aren't directly contradicting each other because they're measuring different things.
Right.
But, and this is where I'd still hold the line, The conference study's problem isn't that the large studies prove it wrong. The conference study's problem is that it doesn't prove itself right. It's claiming a link to cardiovascular disease risk, and it has no data on cardiovascular disease outcomes at all. The large studies are additional context, not the refutation. The refutation is that 18 people having a slower heart rate recovery after a step test doesn't tell you anything about whether those people are going to develop heart disease.
Yes, okay, that I'll fully take. The issue isn't this contradicts other research, it's this research doesn't actually support its own conclusion.
Exactly. The burden of proof wasn't met. The big studies just tell us that if you were going to meet that burden, you'd also be fighting against a million data points in the other direction, which is not a small thing.
No, it's not. Okay, so where does that leave us? Because I do want to be fair here, because there is something real in all of this.
The acute effect is real. Caffeine does temporarily raise your heart rate and blood pressure. That's well established. If you have a pre existing heart condition or you're particularly sensitive to caffeine, that's a legitimate conversation to have with your doctor. Individual responses vary.
But what about people who are otherwise healthy and just read the headline, who are now worried that their morning coffee is quietly damaging their heart?
For those people, the evidence from decades of research on over 1 million participants says you're fine. And not just fine in a neutral, no harm way, potentially fine in an actively beneficial way.
Which the headline did not mention.
The headline absolutely did not mention.
So here's what I'd want someone to take away from this. 2 questions. Every health headline, 2 questions. First, is this a published, peer-reviewed study or a conference presentation? That distinction matters. Second, and this is the one I care about more, what did they actually measure? Did they measure the scary thing the headline claims, or did they measure something smaller and then make a very large leap?
And if the answer to the second question is they measured something much smaller and made a very large leap, that's not science being reported. That's science being stretched.
18 people recovering slightly slower from a 3-minute step test is interesting preliminary data. It might be worth a follow-up study with better controls and a larger sample and actual outcome tracking. It is not grounds for calling your mum.
It is absolutely not grounds for calling your mom
Your coffee is fine. Go drink it.
with evidence.
Right, that's all for today's dive into the data. Just remember, everything we've discussed is our interpretation of published research and shouldn't replace professional medical advice.
Absolutely. If you're dealing with health or mental concerns, talk to your doctor, not just us data nerds on a podcast.
I'm Alex Barrett,
And I'm Bill Morrison
and we'll see you next time.
on Truth Seekers,
Until then, question everything.
but verify with data.